It's imperative to understand that the conferences and meetings of the Council on Foreign Relations, also Council of the Americas, Royal Institute for International Affairs, Institute of Pacific Relations, Trilateral Commission, Gorbachev Foundation, Bill Gates Foundation, etc., etc., and other places where major decisions are made or new strategies embarked. Rather, these social gatherings, because that's what they really are, capitalize on the CFR's use of its special discussion groups to advance its policies. And so, Council on Foreign Relations has historically operated in small groups of about 25 people who bring together leaders from different categories. In fact, there are 6 categories: industrialists, financiers, ideologues, military professional specialists, such as lawyers, medical doctors, etc., and finally, organized labor, for detailed discussions of specific topics in the areas of foreign relations. So, how do the power elite make foreign policy? Well, discussion groups explore problems in a general way, trying to define issues and also find alternatives. And such groups often lead to a study group as the next stage. And study groups revolve around one of the council research fellows, and needless to say, financed by one of the powerful American foundations, such as Carnegie or Ford or Rockefeller Foundation. For example, in a 1968 discussion group, former CIA Director Richard Bissell, who was also a Ford Foundation consultant, he laid out increasing needs for the interplay between CFR members and covert actions to be more discreet when the CIA turned to council members to act as kind of cover for their own clandestine operations. If the agency is to be effective, Richard Bissell said, it'll have to make use of private institutions on an expanding scale. He said, we need to operate under deeper cover with increased attention to the use of cutouts, in other words, intermediaries. And so the CIA interface with the rest of the world needs to be better protected. And then, referring to several blown operations, Bissell said that if various groups hadn't been aware of the sources of their funding, well, we might have been able to contain some of the damage. And so it was suggested to use the CIA as the interface with various private groups and also business organizations to remedy the situation. The CFR's influence seamlessly extends throughout the American way of life. The Council on Foreign Relations, while not financed directly by government, works so closely with it that sometimes it's difficult to distinguish council actions stimulating by government from autonomous actions not stimulated by the government itself. Now, who pays for it all? Well, the most important sources of funding are leading corporations and major foundations. As to the foundations, the major contributors over the years have been the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. All foundations which support Council on Foreign Relations are in turn directed by men, for example, from companies such as Bichelle Construction, Chase Manhattan Bank, Kimberly-Clark, Monsanto Chemicals, and dozens of other well-known global mega corporations. And further, to complete the circle, most founders, directors, are also members of the CFR. For example, in the early 1960s, Dan Smoot found that 12 of 20 Rockefeller Foundation trustees, 10 of 15 Ford Foundation trustees, and 10 of 14 Carnegie Foundation trustees were also members of Council on Foreign Relations. And still, after all this information is out, some people feel that, well, we're grasping at straws. After all, business influences society, they say, and politics influences society. That's purely common sense. Apparently, it's not that business contests the right of democratically elected leaders to lead. That's what they say, right? Well, let's see. George Ball made a presentation titled Internationalization of Business at the 1968 Bilderberg meeting at Mont-Tremblant, Canada, in the province of Quebec. Now, his speech provided a far more truthful and insightful glimpse into the group's economic orientation. Ball, by the way, was the Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs under JFK and also Lyndon Johnson administration, a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, as well as senior managing director for Lehman Brothers and Kuhn Low. Being defined what the new Bilderberg policy of globalization was going to be and how this policy would shape the group's policy. In essence, Ball presented an outline of the advantages of what he called a new colonial world economic order based on the concept of a world company, and described some of the obstacles that needed to be eliminated for its success. And so, according to Ball, the first and most important thing that had to be eliminated was, listen to this, the archaic political structure of the nation state. In other words, Ball was calling for a return to the old colonial system, but this time built on the concept of a world company. In other words, one world company, limited corporations that have more power than any government on the planet. And so, to be productive, according to Ball, we must begin our inquiry by explicitly recognizing the lack of phasing between development of the world company, a concept responding to modern needs, he said, and the continued existence of an archaic political structure of nation states, mostly small or of medium size, which is evolving only at glacial pace in response to a new world requirements of scope and scale. And so let me translate that for you. For Ball, the very structure of the nation state and the idea of commonwealth or of general fare of the people represented the main obstacle against any attempt of freely looting the planet, especially the weak and poor nations of the world, and represented the most important impediment in the creation of what he calls neo-colonial world empire. And so the priority of the world company is obviously based on international free trade without restraints. In other words, trade measured by the British standards of profit of buying cheap and selling dear. The problem is that national governments or nation states have priorities which are different from and contrary to those of a global company limited. And Mr. Ball let this big rabbit out of the hat when, according to page 39 of the Bilderberg transcript from the 1968 Bilderberg meeting at Mont-Tremblant, he wistfully asked, where does one find a legitimate base for the power of corporate managements to make decisions that can profoundly affect the economic life of nations to whose governments they have only limited responsibility? In other words, what Mr. Ball would like to know is, how does one establish a BlackRock type of world company which would greatly surpass in authority any government on the planet? So how does one establish David Rockefeller's utopian idea of the world where supranational sovereignty of the world bankers supersedes national auto-determination practices in past centuries? Well, in fact, it's quite simple. You see, current representative democracy works on the basis of an elected government, which is a head of state, and a sizable deliberative body, which can be pretty much dumped anytime it may be decided by orchestrating a crisis, along with a third power called an independent central banking system in charge of its finance. Now, in the United States, this independent banking system is known as the Federal Reserve System, which is a privately owned bank system interlocked with the Bilderbergers and Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. Now, in Europe, the independent banking system is run through European Central Bank, whose monetary policies are put together by the leading members of the Bilderberger inner circle. And in Britain, this independent system is run by the Bank of England, whose members are also full-time members of the Bilderberger inner circle. And so the independent central banking system controls the issuance of currency, controls national credit, controls interest rates, and anytime the government displeases it, it uses its power to orchestrate the overthrow of the government. And this is what Kuhn Loeb and the Lehman Brothers have been building worldwide, a kind of a way of mergers and acquisitions from the 1960s until today. And so in the past decades, the entire deregulation policy of the United States industries and banking was precisely set up in response to this blueprint scenario for creating these giant corporations for a new empire whose intention is nothing short of perpetual war. And of course, creating these giant corporations was, in fact, the very first step towards European integration. And in fact, 25th of March 2023 marks the 66th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, one of the most important treaties in the long historical trend of European integration. And the treaty led initially to the creation of the single market beginning on the 1st of January 1958 between France and West Germany and Italy, and the Benelux with the establishment of the European Economic Communities, overseen by the European Commission, which is an executive governmental body operating autonomously from the participating states. And so the signing of the treaty did not come about overnight, but concluded a heavily debated process, in fact, since the end of World War II, back in 1945, between supranationalists who wanted to create this executive governmental body above the nation states, and the what they called themselves at the time, intergovernmentalists who favored multilateral relations. And for example, the first 5 Bilderberg conferences in 1954 and 55 and 56 and 57 and 58 played a decisive role in the lead up to the signing of the Treaty of Rome, recognized by the European Union itself as a kind of formative event that lies at its foundation. And during these meetings, protectionism was successfully subordinated to the liberalizing idea of a common market. And documents leaked, for example, by WikiLeaks, showed that there was a general recognition of the pressing need to bring about the German people together with other peoples of Europe into a common market among the Bilderbergers as its third conference, which took place in September 1955. Now, as the Bilderberger document states, it was generally recognized that it is our common responsibility to arrive in the shortest possible time at the highest degree of integration, beginning with the common European market. And according to George McGee, former US ambassador to West Germany, and also numerous times Bilderberg, indeed, the Treaty of Rome, which brought about the common market, was nurtured at the Bilderberg meeting. And in 1955, the same year in which the above-mentioned Bilderberg meeting was held, there was this revitalization of European politics that eventually led to the signing of the Treaty of Rome. And after the conference of Messina in Italy in June of that year, an intergovernmental conference under the leadership of Paul-Henri Spaak was set up to remove the last obstacles on the path of the common market. Now, Spaak was a Belgian politician who, much like Monet, was heavily tied into the Atlanticist power elite structure and had always been a staunch supporter of the European economic supranationalism. In other words, something above and more powerful than any country on the planet Earth. And he was, of course, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Belgian government in exile, and thus resided in Britain during World War II, which lies at the foundation of the Benelux Customs Union. And then he became the head of the European movement with the help of none other than the CIA in the 1950s. Later, Spaak, in fact, will become the NATO Secretary General. He is reported to have attended at least one Bilderberg meeting, although I haven't seen his name on any of the lists. There is enough evidence to believe that he did attend. Now, there were, however, a number of other insiders behind the scenes that played a very important role in this Spaak report as well. And these included famous names: Robert Rothschild, which is a direct descendant of the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, and also Etienne d'Avignon, a well-known Eurocrat who has attended every Bilderberg meeting imaginable. In fact, he was a member of the steering committee and even served as the chairman of the Bilderberg Group in 1998, 1999, year 2000, and 2001. And so the final negotiations transpired relatively smoothly in the Benelux countries, Italy and West Germany, but the French government was not convinced about joining the Union despite de Gaulle's temporary disappearance from the political stage after it was assured that the inclusion of Monet's Eurotown plan, which centered around the cooperation in the field of atomic energy, and also a protectionist common European agriculture policy, which is very important to the French, France agreed to sign the Treaty of Rome, which eventually happened on the 25th of March, 1957. The fact that as a result of time pressure, the text, now listen to this, the text of the agreement itself was signed on a blank piece of paper without the signatories being aware of the finer points of the agreement, is perhaps perfectly characteristic of the power unelected, influenceable, and corruptible Eurocrat insiders have been able to wield through the back door of Brussels' hub of centralization. And so, to summarize, the historical trend towards European integration can only be understood as a kind of a mixture of several intertwining factors. One well-known factor, needless to say, such as the traumatizing effect of World War II, for instance, played an instrumental role in swaying public opinion in favor of integration as well. Nonetheless, even though public opinion might have been able to agree on the economic integration, the newly created supranational institutions were made to serve the very special interests and not necessarily those of the people.